Hey folks, welcome back to the Psychedelic Podcast. Today we have on Kevin Cannella, a licensed professional counselor, a MAPS-trained psychedelic therapist, and the co-founder and executive director of Thank You Life, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating financial barriers to psychedelic therapy. Kevin, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
So I would love to dive right in just to talk a little bit about your formative years and what led you on this path. We'll get into Thank You Life, but I'd love to, in particular, focus on your work at the overlap of professional counseling and psychotherapy, because in some ways that's a unique background. I don't think we've had anyone on prior to sort of explore that overlap and intersection. And I'm curious how your early experiences with ayahuasca and meditation influenced this path towards becoming a trained psychedelic psychotherapist, but also offering professional counseling to those who need it.
You know, I would say like the first round of like formative things for me was really my experience in college. And went to Georgia Tech, was in a fraternity, kind of did that whole thing, the partying, etc. But yeah, there was some kind of curiosity that a handful of us had around psychedelics and used them a handful of times. Looking back, I would say I was having quite mystical experiences, and that kind of took me from, entering college as mostly an atheist, to be honest, to having a wild interest in spirituality and where we came from and what's going on here, so to speak. I think, born out of those experiences, I got really into reading all kinds of books about spirituality, psychedelics, to the point where, by the time I graduated, I just felt such a pull that I didn't want to jump into, some corporate work that, to be honest, around me, it seemed like everybody who went that path, it kind of just deadened their soul a bit. And so I wanted something different. And I read about ayahuasca, heard about ayahuasca. It piqued my interest for obvious reasons because I was already into these things. And, I had this one friend who, she's actually now also a psychedelic therapist in Atlanta, Maya Lemberg. She was my only real contact outside of the whole kind of Georgia Tech sphere. And she was my one kind of pull into conscious community and these different sorts of things. And so I asked her, and she was like, oh yeah, so there's like retreat centers that you can go to, et cetera. And yeah, went home that night. This is like the semester I was graduating, and typed into Google ayahuasca retreat centers, and 3 came up, including the Temple of the Way of Light. And I emailed all 3 of them about volunteer opportunities, and kind of was off to the races. Temple of the Way of Light got back to me, and I was able to make that connection. And that was like, I would say, the big left turn that I took in my path. And I spent, 7 months in Peru, volunteered there for about 5. And, that was just really the beginning of it all, where I had some experiences with ayahuasca, but also really, stopped drinking, stopped smoking pot, completely changed my diet for the ayahuasca diet. So just a lot of kind of cleansing that happened with that. And then at the same time, I was able to do a 10-day Vipassana, which was quite grounding after a lot of ayahuasca, especially for a 22-year-old. So that was super helpful. And then, I made my way to Maui, and for the next 5 years, so it's like 22 to 27 for me or so, I was work trading on farms on Maui and really deepening into those two. Vipassana was happening on the Big Island, so I would go over there for retreats every year, and then found some more ayahuasca on Maui, and really got what I was going after, which was like just a depth of spiritual experience. To fast forward to the end of that, by the time I was 27, the exploration period kind of came to a natural close, and I was like, cool, wow. I really got the experiences that I was looking for, and it just felt like it was time to step into like a bit more self-actualization, and like not even spiritual self-actualization, a much more like worldly self-actualization. And we're talking a lot about purpose, and and abundance and dharma and service and these different things. And, up to that point, service for me was like sweeping the kitchen. And it was like, that's great. And it's also humbling in a sense. And it just felt like there was also something more for me to do, and to activate myself a bit more. And, and psychotherapy really seemed to be the path to that for me. The kinds of conversations I would have in psychotherapy were things that I was talking with my friends about anyway, as we were just kind of processing our experiences and our processes. So it felt like just such a natural fit, and something also that seemed legitimate to the world. I mean, if you can imagine, I went from something that seemed very legitimate in the eyes of the world, getting a degree from Georgia Tech and that whole thing, to everybody just being like, he's doing what? He's where? And so it's like, okay, let me like plug back in a way that seems like legitimate. So
So tell us a little bit about what that was like at Temple of the Way of Light. So Temple of the Way of Light is a retreat center in Peru. It's run by, I think, still run by Matthew Waterstone. It's been around for many, many years. And I would imagine you were there in service prior to ayahuasca really becoming more popular and more of a known thing. So I'm curious what that experience was like for you to be in service for 5 months at the Temple of the Way of Life. What were maybe some of the lessons and teachings and, things that emerged from that?
I helped out in a variety of ways. I was, it was just a lot of like manual stuff, working with like the composting systems that we had, composting toilets that we had, and did a little bit of supporting in ceremony, mostly just like as a sitter, more or less. It was so interesting. It was kind of wild that they did this with us, but every retreat was the first half of the month, and then they would do 7 ceremonies in 12 days. And in the second half of the month, they would do another 7 ceremonies for the volunteers there.
Wow.
And so, just after the first 3 months, I had done 20 something sessions, and that was a lot for me. But, it was really difficult. It was really lonely. And, to tie it back to those books I was talking about, one of the first books that I read was Zen and the Art of Happiness, and talking about like thoughts really creating our reality and this kind of thing. But one piece of it was about happiness coming from within, regardless of circumstance, very Buddhist kind of ideal. And that was my first time with that. And it struck me. I was like, oh, I'm super happy, but it's because of my surroundings completely. I'm living in a fraternity house and drinking and smoking pot all the time and constantly around my friends, and I'm laughing a lot and having a blast. And it's all based on my circumstance. And so, fast forward to being in the jungle, all of that circumstance was ripped away, and it was, super lonely. The ayahuasca was brutal physically, just physically at first. Not a lot was happening mentally, which I think was a gift. And then, a couple months later, the kind of psychological piece, and it just felt like such an unraveling of my psyche. And, it was a long integration period for me. And this first couple years on Maui afterwards, I was still putting my personality back together. I wasn't laughing a lot. I was very quiet. So it was, difficult in its own way, and also, a huge gift to be able to do that in my early 20s. And in a lot of ways, it was the foundation that the rest of my life was built on. I also think about like the idea of the wounded healer, where like a lot of the shit that happens to us and then our healing process through that often brings us to our purpose. And I think for a lot of us in helping professions, is quite a direct thing of like, okay, I had to unpack, my attachment work with my parents or this or that kind of thing from my childhood. And now I'm a therapist and, helping others do that same kind of work. Or now I'm a coach and helping others do that same kind of work. Or, now I'm a psychedelic practitioner, et cetera. But for others, I think it can be a bit more indirect. But there's still like kind of a through line there. Of it reminds me a lot of the hero's journey and this piece of like, okay, we're each here to do, like, I can engage in psychotherapy to kind of understand my work, my pain, and what lights me up, and move toward that and explore what that is for me.
I think where I go to is like, what lit you up as a child, and how did that lead to Thank You Life and what you're doing now as a nonprofit? If you go a little bit into your own psyche and your own history, how is it that Thank You Life is an extension or sort of a flowering of some of these seeds that were planted early on in your life and existence?
I still have a lot of curiosity around that. There's a couple early experiences. I would sometimes lie in bed. I must have been like 6 or 7, and try to imagine what it would be like when I was dead. And what would happen is it would feel very pleasurable, and I would almost kind of see the earth continuing on, and I would be just like floating up above the earth, kind of watching it. And then the other piece I think about is like as a teenager reading Animal Farm in school, and that's kind of what led me into that whole like atheistic kind of stuff. So I think fundamentally there was always this feeling like what I was being told by adults wasn't quite the truth, and just having this deep seeking for the truth inside, and then some kind of mystical bent that I didn't even really quite know how to describe. And so all of that really like led to this interest in psychedelics in undergrad. And I would say that was that kind of first flowering. And then to speak about Thank You Life a bit, my entire time in Peru and Maui, I made very little money. I was very intentionally not going after money, and still was somehow able to have this whole breadth of experience. And, it was all from volunteering at the temple. All the Vipassana retreats are donation based. So I was able to give what I could, but it was like very little. And then I could also serve some of the Vipassana retreats, like work in the kitchen for 10 days. And then there was these other things that I did where I had more scholarships and work trade opportunities. And so I had this whole, like I said, I got the experiences that I wanted, and it was all from the benefit of others, like others who had gone before me, giving to me, seeing something in me, giving me a scholarship, giving me a work trade opportunity or a volunteer opportunity. And, there's something really precious about that all of my healing was like a gift to receive from other humans in that kind of sense. Thank You Life on my side was born, I think, twofold. One was just very practically, like, now that I was a therapist, we're all doing sliding scale, especially in psychedelic work, we're all doing sliding scale. And, it was very much like, how can we make this work for the folks that we want to serve? And I was also looking at the other practitioners, like, we can all just do a limited amount of sliding scale before, we begin breaking our own bank, so to speak. Yeah, it just seemed like a really kind of natural solution to figure out if there could be this pay it forward sort of fund. And that ultimately became Thank You Life. And what feels really special to me is similar to that thing that I was talking about with like the wounded healer. I think there's also this thing of like, I'm able to give what I have already received. And it, again, feels really beautiful to be able to set something up where others can receive so much of what I was given in terms of financial assistance. And so creating this and having, like you were saying, 190 people to date receive financial assistance for psychedelic work just feels so full circle for me to as like a give back, give forward sort of piece there.
The follow-up question that I have for you about Thank You Life is a little bit more, I guess, of a logistical question, and we might get into the weeds here a little bit. So we've had a couple people on the podcast who have talked about this overlap between insurance and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So just for listeners to have a little bit more context, Spravato, which is a patented S-ketamine developed by Johnson & Johnson, can often be covered by health insurance, but that is a nasal spray. You have to be in a clinic to utilize it. And it is the patented sort of version of ketamine. There's also, generic ketamine. There are some interesting ways that I've heard about where health insurance can come in and cover some of these intravenous ketamine treatments or ketamine troches. But it's still a bit of a minefield. As an example, I've heard horror stories of insurance companies trying to claw back certain reimbursements once they found out that this was a generic ketamine that was, offered for treatment-resistant depression or whatever it is. So I'm curious how you think about sort of that landscape as it relates to Thank You Life, because Thank You Life is this nonprofit, pay it forward, providing treatments to people who do not necessarily have access to these treatments from a financial perspective. And I think the ideal hope is that we have a health insurance system that actually covers these treatments for folks. And it does to some degree, but as I mentioned, it is a bit of a minefield. So as you've navigated through Thank You Life and as you see sort of the emergence of insurance covering maybe more of these treatments, how do you think about Thank You Life within that overall context?
Totally. In some ways, all of us, our board, myself, our staff has said, if we don't need to exist, great. Yet we don't foresee that happening in the near term. But yeah, I think you said it well as a minefield. And I also think it's changing very rapidly. And I feel like I hear very differing accounts from insiders who are both, I think, telling me their truth at least. It seems like the VA covers ketamine infusions, at least in some cases or in some states. And then, I've heard of different clinics in our networks getting different amounts of insurance coverages, but by and large, them not having insurance coverage. A lot of the clinics for some context here, Thank You Life is a financial assistance fund, and we partner with 120 ketamine clinics in 35 states. Our whole thing is for psychedelic therapy access. At the moment, almost all of that is ketamine because that is what is here and legal. So, we have this body of ketamine clinics that we partner with, and a lot of them they do amazing work, and because it's so expensive and not covered by insurance, it's difficult for them to make the finances of their business work. And so some of them are leaning on Spravato, because they can actually get reimbursed for that, and it's not a big financial load on their clients. Although, if finances was not an option, they would absolutely not be using Spravato. They would choose to use some other form of racemic ketamine. Yeah, it's just an interesting industry that is embedded in a really, fucked up American medical system. And there's some different pushes. I actually had a couple of days ago a great talk with Rock from Beckley and Beckley Clinical in particular. So Beckley has this whole ecosystem and all these different pieces. And what he was speaking to is one of their organizations is called Beckley Clinical, and they're looking to partner with a lot of ketamine clinics and provide some wraparound services for them so this is kind of specifically for infusion clinics that are not doing any psychotherapy at the moment, that they can help provide some psychotherapy. There's a tech piece to it, and ultimately they would collect data with it. And with all of that, their idea is in a couple of years to be able to go to payers. So this is insurance companies, to show the, financial ROI that an insurance company can have if they actually cover racemic ketamine. So, that's one angle. A whole separate angle is a bit more like, this is not with ketamine, but what Rick and Maps was trying to do in Lycos, and going more through the FDA. Now, ketamine going through the FDA is a bit more difficult because it's already a generic drug, and because of that, there's not a lot of incentives for a pharma company to post the millions of dollars needed for the research. And so a different way in is not to have, all of that research, but just to have enough real world evidence for the payers, again, the insurance companies, to show them, hey, if you cover this, it can benefit you in the long run because there'll be less other mental health stuff that you're covering from your people. And then what I would put on top of that is all of these state and federal legislation that's happening, which is, basically is just a very quickly changing landscape. I mean, in some ways very slowly changing, and in other ways very quickly changing landscape. And it's interesting to navigate for sure. I think I feel very alive being in an emerging field, and that feels really cool. And it's also fucking chaotic at times, and which is interesting. I think psychedelics helps us hold, or has at least helped me hold, uncertainty. And it's just I think a natural part of being in an emerging field, especially one without regulation that might get regulation, or the regulations may change. It's just a lot of holding uncertainty and doing our best to navigate mostly in the dark, and kind of do what we can and try to do what's right. With that, I'll also say, I think there can sometimes be a lot of differing opinions in psychedelics, where as an industry, we could be a lot stronger if we had more of a united voice. And I get why it's difficult to do so. And there are a lot of different ways to go about things. And, I believe the church model should be available. I also believe that, very much like the Graham Hancock kind of view, like adult humans should be able to do what they want with their consciousness.
Cognitive liberty. Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's, very much in good faith for psycho-emotional growth and spiritual connection and all of those kinds of things. And I also the medical model is also super helpful and such a great container for another sector of people, and to do a certain sect of personal work.
I'm curious, with these ketamine clinics that you have in your network, how many, if any, are doing group work with ketamine? And is that something that you've looked into covering as part of Thank You Life, or are you explicitly focused right now on ketamine infusions or IV ketamine in a sort of one-on-one, strictly clinical setting?
Yeah, so we do groups. A lot of the clinics that we work with either do groups or want to do group. And that was something early on. So, 2023 was our first year operating. And during that year, it was very small at first. We helped 37 people, gave away $100,000 to do all of that. And I think there was 2 or 3 groups that we did that year. Yeah. And, we saw it as really playing 2 roles. One, being able to bring the cost down even more. So our dollars that we're giving to clinics will go further. The cost to the clients will be less. And then there's also just a really great healing component to it, particularly for certain populations. And so, one group that we did was for, queer women of color in San Diego. And I think that was a really beautiful group for all of them. And we've done a couple different veterans groups now. And, I've just found a lot of success. Ultimately, I want Thank You Life to be, is a bit of my vision for it, is a platform where anyone with their particular population that they're a part, their community that they're a part of, and the people that they care about, they can come to us and help get that community, that population, access to psychedelic therapy. From people who have gone through domestic violence, women with sexual trauma, cancer patients, caregivers, hospice, people going through death, like the dying process. In that sense, ultimately, we really want to be like population agnostic, but be a mechanism for really any kind of group to help get this sort of work to their folks.
And so in that process, how do you discern who gets financial assistance and who doesn't? Because I mean, I'm making a big assumption here, but I imagine as a fund, financial assistance fund, you'd have more applications than funds that you could give out. And so what is that process like? Do you only work with the ketamine clinics and they choose and decide who actually gets the treatment, and you just provide a certain budget to them to then cover that treatment? It sounds like you've done some intentional groups before, like you mentioned the group in San Diego. So tell us a little bit about that application and the discernment process about how do you actually disperse the funds that you are providing?
Yeah. First of all, I'll say all the folks at the moment come through the clinics. And yeah, funding is our biggest stopgap at the moment. So with 120 clinics, and we're going to be around 200 clinics by the end of the year, we could easily do 1,000 clients this year. For context, last year we did 111 folks, and that cost about $240,000. And so to 10x that, we're looking at, $2 to $2.5 million. So that is our biggest need at the moment. We've really, up till now, built out the infrastructure to be able to put people through the process, help people in 35 states all over the country. And now it's really just about getting the funding there so that the people coming through the clinics to us, we can actually serve. So we have an application process. We take in everybody's financial information. We get, like a W-2 or equivalent from them. And based on, where they live, their household size and their income size, we come up with basically a percent that we should cover. And then we also ask them what they need. And so if those match up, great, that's simple. If they're asking for less than what our formula says, great, that's an easy yes. And then if they're asking for more, there's also a section where they can really just kind of tell their story a bit, because we don't want anybody to just be like a number and be like, oh, well, your life is like really intense financially at the moment, but according to our formula, you don't get anything, so bye. So we really want to like humanize the process in that kind of way and take each thing on a case by case. And we have not run into any issues with that. Most of the folks is pretty simple, and, our formula matches what their need is anyway. And so that's worked really well for us. But I would say, yeah, there is that kind of piece. And so a wide variety of people can get something from us. And sometimes it's like 20%, and sometimes it's more 80, 90, 95%. As best as we can, we have people pay something to really have some skin in the game. And we've heard that from a lot of clinicians and have seen it ourselves, that there's a lot more effort put in when people are, putting their own skin in the game, so to speak. And then with the groups, it's a little bit different, because that will be something where usually there's a particular population, and then it's more just up to the clinic to promote the particular group and screen the folks, and then send them to us, and we'll still do the financial piece on the back end. That's a little different because they're actually going to fill a group rather than just sending us like a one-off person who happens to walk into their clinic and need financial support.
That's super interesting. I mean, I do like this point about having skin in the game, and whether you can cover 20 or 50 or 80%, allowing that individual to come in and pay for it a little bit themselves makes them way more likely to show up and commit to the treatment and really follow through on that process. Because as we know, as psychedelic practitioners or folks who are very familiar with the space, the experience itself is certainly useful and helpful, but a lot of the long-term benefit comes from the integration as well. And so I'm curious, when it comes to Thank You Life and the assistance provided, is that explicitly for the experience, or are you also looking at how you can support the therapeutic process before and after that experience as well?
Totally. So yeah, the we help cover the entire treatment protocol, which includes the prep and integration. There's a lot to that. There's also, what integration specifically looks like at clinics really varies. Some clinics do it on the back end of the session as clients are coming out. Others have, dedicated sessions where they might do ketamine one week and come in for an integration session the next week without medicine. But yeah, so we cover everything, not just a ketamine session. And then I think there's still room for additional integration support. And we're just starting a partnership with Radiant Hearts, who has these community pods. So they're also a nonprofit based out of Austin, Texas, down here. And their model is really interesting. They basically have pods of 3 or 4 people, and those 3 or 4 people are just clients, essentially, people who are, going through their own psychedelic treatment. They, so at first, they actually go through a bit of training to just understand what it means to hold space for each other. And then they're kind of off on their own to, meet regularly and have essentially their own kind of small integration circle that they, co-lead themselves. I think it's a really beautiful model. They're offering that for free. And so we just started a partnership with them where we're going to set that up for Thank You Life clients. And ideally, the Thank You Life clients will all be with other Thank You Life clients, which I think will be a nice little piece to it too, because I think there's some kind of interesting common ground when you're with other folks who are also in a place where they needed financial support. I think that can just be a great common experience to share about, even beyond the what was your ketamine journey like? It's like, what was it like to find this treatment, see that you weren't able to pay for it, but then still see that you were able to, help make it happen for yourself. So I would say what we had been doing the past couple of years is definitely like version 1, and there's integration included through the clinics. And we're excited to just, build out our offering and to offer something that's ongoing that is not necessarily needed in terms of like minimum viable product, so to speak, but absolutely supportive for a lot of folks.
And so, like, within the next 3 years, how might Thank You Life grow and develop? I mean, more funding means more funds. That means more humans can have access to this treatment. But just in terms of the structure, in terms of how you see that growth and development, what are you sort of focused on when it comes to that?
I mean, that's the most straightforward piece, is how can we, 10, 100x the philanthropy coming to direct service, so we can even begin to scratch the surface in terms of the amount of folks that in terms of our infrastructure that we can help. Now, there's other really interesting partnerships that we're looking at. I'm trying to see what I actually want to share about them, but opportunities to partner with HHS on a state level. In Texas right now, there's some legislation that may get voted on, that we're hoping will get voted on, that would essentially give ketamine vouchers to veterans, active duty service members, and I believe first responders. There will be at least an opportunity, if that gets passed, for us to essentially play the role of delivering all of that, where the clinics would be clinics in our network, which we have a good bit of in Texas. Obviously, we could expand that too for people, clinics doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and doing good work. And essentially, the veteran would give the voucher to the clinic. The clinic would then give the voucher to us, and then we would make sure that they get paid. And we would coordinate all of that and, also collect data on all of that. And so, that is one sort of alternative model, because what's becoming clear to all of us is that there's not enough philanthropy at the moment to really fit the need. And so I think what we're trying to do is kind of, there's at least two prongs to it, where the one prong is, 10 to 100xing our philanthropy, but then also finding these other partnerships where we can really, be that access point for people through, whether it's government programs or other kinds of things like that.
Yeah, because the B2C model, I mean, I'm putting my business hat on now.
Yeah.
The B2C model requires a lot more like marketing efforts in a way, whereas if you're able to get in with certain, governmental organizations and be a trusted partner of them, then you have folks who are naturally coming to the VA or to these other, it could be Medicaid or, other organizations or other programs that the government would offer. And then you're able to get potentially, the other end of that is you could potentially get a large amount of funding from a state government or a federal government to help with covering the cost of X, Y, and Z. So it would sort of go both ways.
Yes. And that, so a lot of people in the industry are very deeply looking into that, Medicaid coverage, as like one big thing. There's some different folks working on that with the idea of if something like this could be covered by Medicaid nationally, that'd be millions of people who suddenly potentially have access. And there's a lot to all of that because, Medicaid does not pay well for psychotherapy. So who knows how well they would pay for ketamine. And then are the clinics going to be accepting Medicaid? Well, it might depend on how much they receive for reimbursement. So there's a lot to that, but yes, I think that we're still majorly pushing in the fundraising philanthropy direction, but these are the things that could really take it to the next level for sure.
Beautiful. Well, Kevin, it's been great to have you on the show today. So for folks who want to learn more, thankyoulife.org is the website about a lot of what we've talked about. Kevin also has a website called kevinonpurpose.global, if I'm not mistaken, about the on-purpose counseling and what he's doing there with psychotherapy. Any other platforms or places that you'd like to point people as they transition out of this conversation today?
Totally. Yeah. So we launched a podcast, the Thank You Life podcast. I'll give that a shout out. You can find that on any kind of platform. We also have a YouTube channel that you can find us. If you type in Thank You Life channel, it should come up. And the podcast is on there. There's also some other videos. We do fireside chats every couple months with people in the psychedelic industry and invite folks to that. So some of those are on there. And a lot of the podcast conversations are with clients that have actually gone through our process. So if you really want to hear a bit more from the client perspective, what their healing arc was like, what it was like to receive some support from us, that's a great place to find that. We also interview some practitioners on there who are in our network, and that can give folks a bit more of a sense of the practitioners that we work with, the doctors and psychotherapists. But we're on Instagram too. Thank you life_fund. I'm on there. I think Kev on purpose is my, private practice one. So feel free to check me out on there. And thanks so much for having me, Paul. I super appreciate it.
This is fun. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. The psychedelic space is evolving every day, and we have a ton of amazing content that's coming out, and subscribing is the best way to keep up to date with all of that great content.